Hoping this works. Oh, good. Welcome to The Great Philosophers. This is, well, it's not really week 2. It's in fact module 2. So let me just edit that very quickly. As you know, we're in the accelerated summer term. We're going to get this class done in about 7 weeks or so. The idea is that we're going to be doing 2 modules per week on our schedule here. I sent a link out over email, so if you're watching the live stream, I don't know if anyone is, but welcome aboard. Otherwise, I will be recording and posting this video to FOL. I tried virtual classroom last week. I had some trouble setting it up. I didn't like the look of it visually. So I'm going to try YouTube live streaming for this class. I obviously watching live is not a requirement of an online only class, but I will be posting the link in advance to my channel. So if you do want to watch live and ask questions in the chat box, that's obviously perfectly fine. Today, I'm hoping to go over some of the material in Module 2 slides. I'm not going to talk my way through the entire slide deck because that would be probably well over an hour, 2 hours of material. Instead, again, I'm just going to kind of try and hit the important aspects of the slides. I'm just still adjusting a few things here. So the context for this class, of course, is still ancient Greece. In the last module, I talked a little bit about the rise of ancient Greek philosophy, Athens, Sparta, the coast of what is now modern-day Turkey, kind of like Asia Minor, as they say, with the Milesian school, and then the kind of the rift between the more empirical school, right, that came out of Thales of Miletus, and the more rationalistic school that came out of Heraclitus and Parmenides. If you recall, the empiricist-rationalist divide fundamentally has to do with the status and origins of knowledge. Rationalism is the view that knowledge foundationally comes from reason. Empiricism is the view that knowledge is foundation is in observation. So when it comes to Socrates and Plato, Plato especially is going to be kind of the archetypical rationalist. So let's get a little bit of context for Plato, for Socrates, and setting up for Aristotle in the next modules. Probably these are the 3 most iconic figures in ancient Greek philosophy. Let me just see if I could find my YouTube channel here. All right. If you are watching live, I will keep an eye on the live chat. So by all means, just send a comment over, and I'll try to answer you. Again, I just really want to emphasize that while I am doing this live, it's not mandatory to watch this live. If you're around, that's great. So let me give you a little bit of historical context just to start with. So what we have is around 500 BC, the city-state of Athens becoming really kind of the center of the ancient Greek world. The political center, the cultural center, the military center. Athens had a pretty formidable naval force. And as Athens gained prominence economically, culturally, militarily, the kind of dominant group of philosophers during this rise to prominence was kind of a more skeptical school, which was trying to focus questions away from these kind of naturalistic attempts to explain the world around them, like Thales saying everything's made of water, Parmenides and his disciple Zeno saying change is an illusion, to more practical questions about society, people's place in society, things we would think of in terms of ethics and political philosophy. This kind of makes sense because as Athens kind of becomes a center of this quasi-empire, really abstract metaphysical questions are going to take second place to, other issues that will be gripping Athenian citizens, because Athens is nominally a democracy. Now, it's not the kind of democracy we have today. Um, it was a democracy where, a certain group of citizens, um, wealthy male citizens, would be able to kind of congregate in the agora, discuss the issues, and just have like a direct vote on it. Um, so these the Sophists were a group of philosophers who were interested in rhetoric and politics, and they made a living. It was kind of a profession. They made a living instructing young men the art of public speaking and the art of argument. Now, Athenian democracy had its problems, and Socrates and Plato, kind of coming in the coming in the wake of these sophists, criticized what they viewed as populism, demagoguery, and rhetoric taking over Athenian democracy. Um, but democratic politics led to a form of political philosophy, and so we can think of the sophists as kind of a class of philosophy teachers making a living by instructing uh, young men in the art of kind of participating in this new form of government. And again, Athens, ancient Athens at the time, was a very interesting place. Um, Here's Pericles, a famous Athenian naval general, and in his funeral oration for fallen soldiers during a battle, the Battle of Salamis, but I'm not sure. I'm not a historian. Um, but this quote from the funeral oration actually gives a sense of Athens' self-conception at the time. He says, "Our constitution does not copy the laws of neighboring states. We are a pattern to others, not imitators ourselves. Its administration favors the many instead of the few. That is why it is called a democracy. If we look to the laws, they afford equal justice to all in their private differences. If no social standing, advancement in public life falls to reputation for capacity, class considerations not being allowed to interfere with merit. Nor again does poverty bar the way. If a man is able to serve the state, he is not hindered by the obscurity of his condition." So these are, it's only sort of true, but it's definitely more true than pretty much anywhere else in the immediate world. We throw open our city to the world, and never by alien acts exclude foreigners from any opportunity of learning and observing, although the eyes of an enemy may occasionally profit by our liberality. Um, so this is a really interesting self-conception of Athens. So we had this group at the time, as I've said, called the Sophists. Right? These were intellectuals who had kind of as a job being intellectuals. So they were teachers. They taught rhetoric. They taught useful skills to ambitious young men in democratic Athens for a fee. They were often kind of relativists because their job was teaching rhetoric, because their job was teaching how to argue. They would just teach you to argue whatever conclusion you wanted in the public sphere, because you were getting paid to tutor someone in the art of argument. So an ambitious young person would go up to his office and say, "Hey, I want to convince my fellow citizens of this. Can you help me?" And he says, "Sure. Just pay me and I'll tell you how to make that argument." The conclusion really didn't matter. That was a pretty big difference from the other philosophers we talked about, who were really interested in pursuing the truth with capital T, whereas the Sophists saw themselves as kind of more skeptical relativists who were um, not really interested in the pursuit of truth necessarily, but had a philosophy that uh, prized skepticism, flexibility, and a little bit of relativism. So Protagoras, for example, said man is the measure of all things. There's no objective morality. Just a human creation. And the reason I'm kind of talking about the Sophists so much as a lead up to Socrates is because Socrates really, really disagreed um, with the Sophists on this position. Socrates and his student Plato believed there were objective moral truths, that it wasn't all just opinions and rhetoric in the public sphere. So there was some suspicion of these sophists, of these philosophers, because they would make, as Socrates often put it, their job was to make a weak argument appear strong, which undermines democracy, undermines the court system, and undermines the pursuit of truth. Um, And there's a lot of context to what was happening around this time, and I'm already a little bit over time, but you have to remember also that around this time, 490, 420, before Common Era, right? This was a wealthy, prosperous Athens, ascendant, dominating the region, and then there was a civil war, the Peloponnesian War between Athens and Sparta. And it wasn't just war; it was atrocity. There was a plague at the time, and they weren't good at social distancing. Um, so war and the plague really decimated the population, weakened Athenian supremacy, and there was a period of Greek decline. And this was kind of the environment Socrates grew up in. So he served in the Athenian military during the Peloponnesian War, sort of blamed the sophists for dragging Athens into this disastrous civil war, criticized them for being relativists, criticized democracy as being a kind of mob rule that led them to disaster, and then, as in his later adult life, saw an Athens on the decline. So you can read again. I'm going to skip some of the slides here because I don't want to be I don't want to make you listen to like an hour-long video. But you can read a little bit about how the kind of Athenian empire led to tension with other Greek city-states, led to civil war, and really marked Athenian history and the intellectual development of the time. Okay, I have some questions in the chat box, so let's do that right now. I have a question as far as the textbook goes. Is it necessary to fully read the textbook, or should we focus more on certain areas? So generally for these kind of 1,000-level courses, the textbook is not necessary for the quizzes. The slides are enough for the quizzes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at my slides and kind of generate questions on the basis of the content of the slides. The textbook is your area of focus for your essays. So you're going to be writing essays. And if you don't have the textbook, if you didn't buy it, you didn't read it, you're just going to have to do a little bit of extra research on your topic. So what I'm going to want you to do, if you haven't been reading the textbook or you didn't purchase it, it's online in Fanshawe Library, by the way. Just do a little bit more research on your topic and look for good secondary sources. You can even start with Wikipedia. I'm perfectly fine with Wikipedia. So, in other words, for online quizzes and tests, slides. For essays, the book or research. So I want to see a little bit of research if you're not citing the book. I think the books were very, very good. I enjoy reading it myself, but I know it is a fast-paced course. Thank you. Very good questions, and I'll make an announcement online or leave a little note about that point there. So thank you, Kaylin and Ashley. Thucydides, Athens, you can read about that, Socrates. So the main sophists of the time that we remember historically, Protagoras, right, with regard to the gods, I cannot feel sure either that they are or that they are not, nor what they are like in figure. For there are many things that hinder sure knowledge, the obscurity of the subject, the shortness of human life. So Protagoras, right, relativist, man is the measure of all things. We're not sure if the gods even exist. We have also Gorgias, the nihilist, who argued nothing exists. Even if something exists, nothing could be known about it. Even if something could be known about it, knowledge about it can't be communicated. And even if it could be communicated, it could not be understood. One of his examples for this view was color. How could we communicate what a color is like, since the ear, quote, does not hear color but only sounds? And this is a pretty powerful consideration for a couple thousand years ago, right? Like, how do you explain color to somebody who has never seen, right? Somebody who's blind. There's a sense in which you can't, because the experience of color vision is subjective and unique to the visual medium. So, right, so we kind of see the kind of skeptical outlook of these teachers of rhetoric that prospered in democratic Athens before the Civil War. Which leads us to Socrates. So Socrates lived, 469, 399 before Common Era, right, in the city-state of Athens. He was not a sophist. He never accepted money for teaching. He just kind of hung out. He was a cobbler, so he made shoes. But in his spare time, he just kind of hung around Athens, pestering people, just talking philosophy with them and asking them how they knew what they knew. Um, and he had a bit of a following, especially amongst the youth of Athens, because Socrates really enjoyed asking older, respected citizens of Athens their opinions on politics and morality, and then making them look a little bit foolish by poking holes in their answers. And eventually, he was put on trial for corrupting the youth, convicted, and executed by the state. Now, the story of his trial, his conviction and execution, is told in by his student Plato, who wrote down some dialogues featuring Socrates as the main character. These dialogues cover not only his trial, conviction, and execution, but various issues in philosophy, in epistemology, the study of knowledge, in metaphysics, the study of the fundamental nature of reality, in ethics, the study of morality, and justice or political science. Um, Now, the historical Socrates did not write anything down. That's Plato. Everything we know about Socrates comes from secondhand accounts by his contemporaries. Um, we're pretty sure he's an actual historical figure because a lot of different textual sources attest to his life events. So Plato writes about his trial. Xenophon, who's an Athenian general, I think, wrote about his trial and execution as well. Aristophanes, who is a comic playwright, poked fun at Socrates and other philosophers in his play The Clouds. Aristotle wrote about Socrates. Aristotle was Plato's student, so he was Socrates' grand student in a way. So we know Socrates existed, but Socrates didn't write anything down. And of the things that have been written about Socrates, it's Plato's dialogues that are the most well known. Um, the parts of the dialogues that cover his trial are probably the ones that are most historically accurate. Plato wrote a lot using Socrates as a main character, but but some of these dialogues probably strayed from what actually happened as Socrates kind of becomes a mouthpiece for Plato's own views. This is especially true in the Republic. Um, so Socrates was put on trial for corrupting the youth, for being an atheist, for denying the gods, but really he was put on trial for being a public nuisance and making wealthy, prominent citizens of Athens look like fools. So he would confront a famous public figure and ask them about justice and ethics and critique their answers. And the youth of Athens loved following him around, loved watching these prominent citizens be embarrassed by Socrates. Um, so I'm just going to skip a little bit over here. Um, and in this context, so Socrates is put on trial for corrupting the youth, basically for embarrassing prominent citizens of Athens. And at his trial, he is convicted. He's found guilty of corrupting the youth and denying the gods of Athens. Charges he dismisses as silly. Nevertheless, it was Athenian law, and this gives you an insight into Socrates' character as a person. Um, it was Athenian law that if found guilty, you can propose an alternative sentence, and then the jury would vote on that alternative sentence. In Socrates' case, the people bringing suit against him wanted the death penalty for corrupting the youth. And it was widely thought that Socrates would just propose exile instead. The jury would vote on it, and they would vote exile, and then he'd just have to leave Athens and live somewhere else. Um, so it's the morning after he's found guilty of corrupting the youth, Socrates is asked by the jury to propose his alternative sentence, and then they would vote on that sentence. Um, in fact, uh, that's kind of. But what he did, interestingly enough, was not propose exile. Instead, he said, um, I think my sentence should be that I get to eat with the Olympic heroes at Athens every day. So there was a tradition in Athens that if you won gold in the Greek Olympics, there was like a special catered lunch that you could have at public expense every day. It was like a public banquet. So Socrates proposed alternative sentence was not being exiled. He says, I should be celebrated as a great hero of Athens. And understandably, the jury being given a legal choice between sentencing him to death and then either celebrating him as an Olympic hero, sentence him to death. So after being condemned to death, people still thought, okay, he's trolling us. That's all he ever did in his life is troll us, so he's probably doing it again. He's probably just gonna, flee Athens. And in fact, his friends arranged it. Um, so his friend Crito shows up in his cell one morning. Crito has bribed the guards. And he says, Socrates, look, okay, you had your fun. We had a good laugh at the expense of Athens. You wanted to be, you know, you wanted to be celebrated as an Olympic hero for corrupting the youth. That's hilarious. Good joke. But look, I bribed the guards. Okay, they had too much wine and they're sleeping. And I've arranged that. Okay, we're going to sneak you out to the harbor. Okay, there's a ship there. Okay, that ship is going to take you, across the Mediterranean, a little village, Anatolia Minor. Okay, a little bit of money set aside for you. You could probably live out the rest of your days in peace there. Okay, leave now, escape execution. And he refuses. He says, no, I'm not trolling. I'm serious. My loyalty to the idea of Athens is too great to kind of sneak out of prison. He imagines the laws of Athens speaking to him, saying, look, Socrates, did we not agree on this, to honor the decisions that the city makes? And he says, look, I've raised children in this city. I worked in this city. I made a career here. I served in its military. To disobey now is to show that I never truly respected the idea of Athens and that I was just harassing people. But at my defense, did I not say that I was trying to improve people by asking questions about their beliefs? If I leave now, it will show that I was never serious about my project of questioning my fellow citizens. So it really gives you insight into his character, that given the opportunity to leave Athens rather than be executed, he refused it out of his integrity in his belief that he was doing good to Athens by questioning its citizens' beliefs. Okay. Um, Now, let me give you an example of the kind of thing Socrates got in trouble for doing in Athens. So this is from the Platonic dialogue called the Euthyphro. The Euthyphro shows Socrates in line at the courthouse because he's just been summoned to the courthouse and he's supposed to put down whether he's pleading guilty or not. So he's in line at the courthouse. In front of him, in line, there's a wealthy Athenian citizen who's bringing suit against his dad. Socrates is like, I can't believe you're suing your dad. What are you suing your dad over? Because it was a bit unconventional in Athens to bring legal suit against your own family. It was a bit unseemly. So Socrates is impressed by the man in front of him in line, whose name is Euthyphro, who is suing his own father in the Athenian court system. He says, to do this, you must be pretty sure about your moral beliefs, Euthyphro, Socrates says. Can you tell me what morality is then, you who is suing your own father? Um, so even in line at the courthouse, Socrates can't help but hassle the first person he finds. Um, and so this is just an example of the kind of thing he would just constantly do in Athens to anyone he meets. So he meets Euthyphro, and Euthyphro says, of course I know what goodness is. I know the difference between right and wrong. Goodness is what pleases the gods. And Socrates says, very interesting definition, right? Goodness, what is good is what makes the gods happy, and what is bad is what makes the gods unhappy. So Socrates says, okay, that's really interesting definition. Goodness is what pleases the gods, but why are the gods pleased? Is it, is an action good because God says it's good? Or are the gods saying an action is good just because it is a good action? Right? Well, so what's really going on here? So I'm supposed to do what pleases the gods, but are the gods pleased because something just is good in and of itself? Or are we just doing whatever pleases the gods? So there's kind of a dilemma here. On the one hand, we're saying Socrates is asking, look, is something good just because the gods, like Zeus or whoever, says so? What if the gods tomorrow decree that, hey, let's torture kittens? That's good now. That's what pleases the gods, is punching kittens right in their kitten throat. Well, that seems awful. And you might think, oh well, obviously God would never say that. But if you stop and say, well, if God would never say torturing kittens for fun is good, why not? Are they constrained by something? Are they constrained by an objective sense of good? Are they saying an action is good just because it is, in fact, independently a good action? Right? Because if the gods are merely reporting or telling us about what is in itself good, then the gods are themselves the standard of morality, right? The gods are constrained by an objective morality they can't change. So now Socrates is trolling Euthyphro in line. He's saying, oh, I get what you're saying, Euthyphro. You're saying that if God just told you to start torturing people, you would. And Euthyphro, no, that's not what I mean. It says, oh, I see what you mean, Euthyphro. What you're saying is you don't need God to be good at all, right? Good is independent, and the gods are just telling us what's good, but you don't need God to be good. Hey, everyone, Euthyphro is saying you don't need God to be good. And Euthyphro says, no, that's not what I mean. That's not what I mean. So he just presented this dilemma. Euthyphro has no idea what to say, and he's embarrassed. And Euthyphro's thinking to himself, yeah, maybe we do need to kill this guy. Jeez Louise. This is an old problem that people are still discussing today for divine command theory. Could the gods command us to do evil things and make them good just by their command? I mean, the Bible deals with this, right? When during the sacrifice of Isaac, right? Just kind of dealing with this problem as well. Is something good because the gods say it's good, or are the gods constrained and would never tell us to do something evil? But then good and evil is not right dependent on gods; it's independent of them. So it's a very deep dilemma. And this is what Socrates would do every day, all day, find people and make them worry about stuff. So the Euthyphro dilemma is like a really nice piece of philosophizing. And I think in the course, I think this is the first argument that you really need to stop and think about and understand, because there will be quiz questions about this one. Right? I want you to stop and really think about the dilemma here. And if you're not sure, just hit that Wikipedia link right here. So it's a good Wikipedia link. All right, and I got a little message here. Okay, how am I doing for time? I feel like I've been talking for forever here. Let me just open a window. I've been live for 33 minutes. I was supposed to keep this to 20 minutes. Okay. Let's try to keep it to 45. So Plato, it's because Module 2 is my favorite of the material here. I really love ancient philosophy around this time. So Plato was a student of Socrates. In hindsight, he's kind of widely viewed as probably the most important figure in the history of Western philosophy. Really defined, shaped the discipline for thousands of years by kind of asking the right questions, setting the agenda, and posing the right questions. And he talked about issues in pretty much every subject under the sun, right? We want to talk about metaphysics, epistemology, the nature of language, ethics, political philosophy. We are not going to be giving a full overview of Plato. I'm just going to talk about two main ideas. One, his political philosophy and moral philosophy in the Republic, and second, his view of metaphysics, the theory of forms. So let's just do these two things and then I'll log off. So the two core aspects again, right? His conception of the ideal political system in the Republic of Plato, and his metaphysical views, the theory of forms. So let's start with the Republic. The Republic is one of those really great, one of those really great pieces of writing that I struggle with reading it because it's the translations try to, I think, preserve the rhythm of ancient Greek a little bit too much. There are good translations online, but I really wish somebody would sit down and make a more readable version because it's really great. It starts it starts off from a more abstract discussion of what justice is, what is the nature of justice. So in the first book of the Republic, right, what we have is a little slice of life of Socrates, right? So, and of Athens, right? So Socrates and a number of his friends are hanging around the public square in Athens, and they're kicking the ball back and forth on what is the nature of justice, right? What is the nature of morality? And this sophist Thrasymachus joins the discussion, and of course, being a sophist, he says, "Look, you guys are talking about the nature of justice, but I'm a realist here, right? I'm not some pie in the sky philosopher. You know what justice is? Justice means nothing but what is to the interest of the stronger party. Right? There's no such thing as justice. There's no such thing as morality, right? Might ultimately makes right. Justice is whoever has the bigger gun, whoever has authority and power decides what is quote unquote just, right? Or as he says, injustice is mightier, injustice is freer, more masterful than justice. As I've said from the beginning, justice is just the advantage of the stronger party. Right, so we have this kind of relativistic view. There's no such thing as morality. There's only what power is able to do in the world. Right? There's no, if I'm able to, make you do what I want, then that's justice. So before Plato even begins his long dialogue on the nature of justice, he has to argue against the view that there's no such thing as justice at all. It's one of the things that makes the Republic truly great, is that it's just not some guy's opinion on what he thinks morality is. It's a really systematic investigation of the nature of justice, including detailed discussion of arguments against the view. That's really what makes Plato and this kind of tradition of Athenian philosophy really distinct. Is this kind of back and forth nature. It's not, you know, uh, delivered from on high as a kind of a revelation, and here are my beliefs. These are arguments in the public sphere, and there's kind of a sport of sparring intellectually. This Calvin and Hobbes comic kind of like captures a little bit of Plato's criticism of Thrasymachus. Of course, he's writing through the mouthpiece of Socrates in the Republic. So Calvin in Hobbes is a cartoon strip that was famous when I was a kid. So Calvin's a little boy, Hobbes is the tiger, and Calvin says, "I don't believe in ethics anymore." Right? So he's playing the role of the sophist Thrasymachus. As far as I'm concerned, the ends justify the means. Get what you can while the getting's good. That's what I say. Might makes right, and the winners write the history books. It's a dog-eat-dog world, so I'll do whatever I have to and let others argue about whether it's right or not. Then Hobbes goes, "Shove. Why'd you do that?" Right? You shove it. "Well, you were in my way. Now you're not. The ends justify the means. And I mean for everyone. You don't just me." Ah, yes. And I like that because it kind of captures, in a way, the essence of the Platonic critique of the view that might makes right. So, in the first book of the Republic, right, Plato, through Socrates, is going to give an argument for justice, for the existence of justice, for the view that it's not the case that might just makes right. So in the dialogue, very, very briefly, and again, you have to kind of read the dialogue, read the Kenny book, and he'll give you a much better overview than this short video does. Socrates basically claims that, look, what the wise seek cannot be simply power. Only fools seek power. Those who are skilled in some art, such as, for example, mathematics, are not in competition for power in math. They're not going to suppress other people's research. They share in a common project. So what Plato is going to say through Socrates is something like justice should not be conceived as a property of individuals able to do something, but it's a property of a society. We have just individuals only make sense in the context of a just society. And the notion of thinking of our projects as common is actually quite inevitable. For the powerful to acquire the things they wish, you have to have collaboration, which means we need to have a common set of rules. Now, you could break these rules for your advantage in some cases, but obviously, if everyone did that, the order that allows social collaboration will completely break down. Let me be a bit less abstract about that, right? Social collaboration requiring adherence to rules is not just kind of this makeshift solution, it is the nature of justice itself. And what Plato's trying to say here is that in order to avoid, um, let me back up here. Um, what Plato's trying to say is that uh, if you're interested in expanding your skill in some art, it can't be an isolated project. Um, if everyone was merely trying to suppress other people and expand their own power, what you would have is a constant state of war without actually being able to enjoy the fruits of power. Um, because you would end up in this kind of Game of Thrones situation where you're just a king of an ash heap. In order to get nice things like, I don't know, good food and comfort and the little luxuries of life, you actually need to have some amount of collaboration and morality. Otherwise, everyone's just kind of killing each other in a might makes right scenario. Um, so justice is the property of collective projects of progress where we're all working together towards a common goal to improve our state. And if people are starting to fight each other over it, that whole project breaks down, and then you don't have society anymore. So justice is a property not of individuals but of a society that is arranged towards some common purpose, which is right expanding our abilities and our knowledge towards some kind of increased perfection in it. So what does a just society look like? Social cooperation for Plato takes the form of this kind of hierarchical society where everybody contributes to society to the best of their ability relative to their actual strengths. It's not a democratic society. For Plato, the republic is non-democratic. It's in fact governed by the people who are best at governing. Um, it's not going to be governed by the rabble because, of course, both Plato and Socrates saw what happened to Athenian democracy. Um, in order for the right kind of social collaboration to occur, what you should do is that everybody contributes their proper part to the common project. So if you're really good at farming, you shouldn't become a politician. You should just be the best farmer you can be. If you're really good at ruling, then you should be the best ruler and shouldn't waste your time being a soldier. If you're really good at fighting, then you should be the best soldier, right? But there's different classes, and everybody's contributing according to their ability. Um, or as I say down here, right, the best possible organization is the one where every individual contributes their proper abilities to the overall greater good. So for Plato, justice is going to be the fulfillment of one's appropriate role. So democracy falters, Plato says, because it asks everyone. It asks the unwise, the foolish, the ignorant, their opinion, and counts that opinion as equal to anyone else's. But for Plato, the ideal society assigns to each individual a role that's really suited to their abilities. So you could read a little bit more about the Republic here. It's supposed to be meritocratic, right? So you're not born into a ruling family, right? Your talents have to be seen. So a lot of people have criticized Plato for being anti-democratic, but of course, um, Plato's anti-democratic conception is kind of tempered on the other hand by the fact that he did believe in meritocracy. He did believe in egalitarianism. He was actually extremely ahead of his time in terms of allowing, for example, women to be part of the guardian class, which is the ruling class. Says in Book 5, you will admit that the same education will makes man a good guardian will make a woman a good guardian, for their original nature is the same. So he was a little bit. So it's kind of a mixed bag when it comes to Plato's political philosophy. Again, I'm not really doing his theory of justice much justice. Kenny does a really nice job there. But basically, the book opens with an argument that justice exists. It should be understood as a property of societies working together. in part because if you don't work together and you have this might is right kind of view, you aren't actually able to make progress on anything that you want to do. So it's kind of a self-undermining idea. And then if you want to make progress on the thing you want to do, right, you should just do the best you can in the role best suited to your actual abilities. Right? And that's the best way to collaborate together. Um, okay, let me close up on the theory of forms. 45 minutes, okay. Let's try to keep it under an hour. Oh, this is too long. Um, okay, let's make a sharp hairpin turn towards a completely different topic, which is Plato's theory of metaphysics. Okay, so put that theory of justice stuff to the side, and let's talk about metaphysics. Let's talk about the fundamental nature of reality. Now, when we talk about the fundamental nature of reality, we're talking about how we can find out what it is, how a certain kind of knowledge is possible, knowledge about the way things really are. And like many ancient Greek philosophers, Plato was really deeply struck by progress in the domain of geometry and mathematics. This kind of became the gold standard here because the knowledge given to us by a geometric proof, by a mathematical proof, seemed to be different than the knowledge of observation. A good mathematical proof, a good geometric proof gives you a certain kind of absolutely certain knowledge that applies to infinitely many objects. And Plato was very powerfully struck by that. And he wanted to understand how knowledge of an abstract idea was possible. What I mean by that is, for example, we have an abstract idea of number that we think of as separate from a specific amount of objects, right? So here's 3 marbles, but my idea of 3 is distinct from any set of 3 things. It's an abstract idea. And the fascinating thing for Plato about abstract ideas is that they allow for a greater amount of certainty than we can have in almost any other area of our life. I could turn around, look out my window, and say, oh, I think I saw a bird. Might have been a shadow, could have been a leaf blowing in the wind. I could never be 100% sure. However, if I give you a mathematical proof, I can be absolutely sure about the result. In a way, I cannot be sure about my perception. So I need to understand the nature of abstract ideas. And once I understand that, I can understand how I can get absolutely certain knowledge. And if I have a template for gaining absolutely certain knowledge, I have a template for doing philosophy. Because philosophy is the pursuit of knowledge. So Plato's going to distinguish between mere appearance and reality. And he's going to say what we want is not knowledge of the world of appearance, but we want knowledge of the forms, which is actual reality. Now, what is a form? All right. A form is the abstract idea of a thing. So I'm going to say that so Plato's going to say that concrete particular things. And what I mean by that, by concrete, is not like actual cement. What I mean is specific objects in the physical world. Specific individual objects are just part of the world of appearance. So a painting can be a specific beautiful thing, right? So here's a beautiful painting, and it's an instance of beauty. It's a specific particular instance of beauty. But what is beauty itself? What do all beautiful things have in common? Right? Just the same way. I can have 3 marbles. I can have, hold on, what do I have hanging around here? Right? I could have 3, I don't know if you can see, I have 1, 2, I have 3 guitar picks. Right? What do 3 marbles and 3 guitar picks have in common? Threeness. But where is threeness? Where is the idea of 3? It's abstract. And the philosopher is not after knowledge of individual beautiful paintings, but is after knowledge of what all beautiful things have in common. All instances of the number 3 have in common, the abstract thing. And Plato says the abstract thing is a form. like a mold almost. And this abstract mold explains the fact that specific concrete instances of it could exist, right? Because there's an abstract idea of beauty, a form of beauty, specific beautiful things can exist. Because there's an abstract form of three, we're able to say that is three objects. And it is reason, rationalism, it is reason that gives us insight into abstract ideas. Observation cannot. Observation by itself is not able to give you knowledge of abstract ideas. That is a role reason plays. Um, so let me give you an example here. Where's my triangle? Okay, let me just explain this a little bit more without going over an hour, I hope. So if think about your knowledge of a triangle. A triangle, a specific triangle in reality is going to be in a way imperfect, and we will not gain knowledge of the properties of triangles by measuring every triangular object in reality, right? So if I was in a university in a math department and what I wanted to do is my project was I'm going to take a ruler, I'm going to take a protractor, I'm going to measure the angles of every triangle I could find. I'm going to measure my Dorito chip, right? I'm going to measure this moth over here, and and this is my research project on nature of triangles. Well, that's a really bad project. That's not a good way of finding out about triangles, right? We use our reason to find out about triangles, right? I don't need to measure every triangle in reality to find out the properties of triangles. And in fact, that's a really bad idea because they're all going to be slightly imperfect, right? It will only approximate the idea of the triangle. Because what is a triangle really? It's this two-dimensional figure with perfectly straight lines that technically aren't supposed to be, right, like they don't have a thickness to it, technically. So the internal, I know from geometry, the sum of the internal angles of a triangle should sum up to 180 degrees. But if I start measuring triangles in reality, well, I'll always be slightly off. So observation of reality doesn't give me knowledge of the abstract idea. The abstract idea can only be apprehended through reason, and it is only knowledge of abstract ideas that is absolutely certain, and that is what the philosopher wants. Absolutely certain ideas, right? And you want this, not just because of the certainty, right? Which is nice because it doesn't matter, it's not opinion, so all the sophists are wrong, right? Knowledge of the abstract idea of triangles is not a matter of relativism. It's not might makes right. You can't just decide that tomorrow mathematics will be different. And it's also eternal. It will continue being true, even if no one believes it, no one knows it, no one discovers it. If there's no minds to think it, it will continue being true. And this is the kind of knowledge the philosophers were really after. At least Plato thought the philosophers would really be after. Um, and Plato wanted to extend this method, of which mathematics and geometry really was the gold standard, really was like the best case study, the best example, and apply it everywhere. You can apply it to anything. You can apply it to chairs, right? What does every chair have in common? Chairness, right? The form of a chair. So what Plato is going to argue is that what goes for triangles, for numbers, is going to go for beauty. For example, there's going to be an abstract form of beauty, which all individual beautiful things share in. And frankly, so will chairs. Right? Every chair is a chair in virtue of its participation in the abstract idea of chairness. So again, what goes for triangles goes for every object. Sometimes we talk about this in terms of the problem of universals. The problem of universals, if you look at the name, it has to do with what is universal amongst many different instances of a kind of thing. So if I think of the all beautiful paintings, there has to be something universal between all beautiful paintings, which is their beauty. Their beauty is universal to all paintings. But where is this beauty? It's an abstract idea. And it's really important to separate out the role reason plays in the doctrine of forms. One example Plato gives in his dialogues is the form of equality. So we will see particular equal things. You can see, for example, sticks that are equal in length. We see there's an equality between 2 plus 2 and 4. What we never perceive is equality itself. We will not perceive equality in the material world. We'll only perceive specific equal objects. But equality must exist, since different equal things bring the idea to our minds. And again, Plato's going to generalize for this and say everything that has a universal has a form. Right? Any shared property between instances of a kind shares a form. All beautiful things share in the form of beauty. All equal things share in the form of equality. Right? All tall things share in the form of tallness. And the goal of the philosopher is to understand the nature of this abstract idea. Because knowledge proper is knowledge of ideas, timeless, eternal, objective ideas that don't decay, don't change, don't right, aren't subjective, right, are absolutely certain. Um, Plato, there's a very famous allegory of the cave where he's trying to paint like a metaphorical, allegorical picture of his theory of knowledge here, of what we should have knowledge of. You can read the Wikipedia link. Again, you could read Kenny. Um, he also argues for various doctrines like the immortality of the soul. I don't want to get into that too much because I'm definitely over the time I wanted for this segment by about a factor of 3. Um, but the doctrine of the forms is really central to Plato's metaphysics. It's in a way central also to his political philosophy as well, because the possibility of absolutely certain mind-independent knowledge speaks against the sophist's view of skeptical relativism. Right? If Protagoras says, everything is relative to people and their perceptions, Socrates is going to go like, no, there are forms, abstract, ideal, timeless, absolutely certain forms of which we can have knowledge. So not everything is relative. And what goes for math goes for justice. And if it goes for justice, then you're wrong, Protagoras. You're wrong, Thrasymachus. Might does not make right. There is justice with a capital J. It's an ideal abstract form, and we should pursue that. Now, next module, we're going to be talking about Aristotle. Aristotle broke with Plato and argued for empiricism. Whereas Plato believed reason would give us knowledge of abstract, timeless forms, Aristotle disagreed. But exactly how is for next time. Thanks so much. I know I went pretty long here. I'll post the video online.